There we go. So welcome everybody, please, Victoria Scott.
Hello, it's really lovely to be here. I am going to, well, I'll introduce myself very briefly, and then I'm going to read you something from my next novel, which comes out on July the 7th, as Mark said. That novel is called Grace. It's coming out on as I said, July 7th is Thursday, in hardback and ebook. And Grace is about a mother whose baby is removed at birth, and about the woman who wants to adopt that baby. This was inspired by something real, something in my own life. A friend of mine who couldn't conceive naturally, and she and her husband wanted to adopt a baby. And they did something called fostering to adopt, which is quite common these days, where the baby is placed with you immediately as a foster parent, but at the same time, they're concurrently planning that you will become the adoptive parent. And they adopted this baby, or they thought they did. They certainly fostered this baby. But in the end, after a court case, the baby went back to the birth family. And I have another friend called Louise Tickle, who's an extraordinary journalist, who has written an awful lot about the family courts in the UK. And the family courts are very, very private. Journalists in general are not able to go and report on them, or they can maybe go in, but they actually can't write anything about them. And the decisions made there have enormous power over people's lives, people's family lives, people's futures. And I wanted to explore what seemed to me to be a situation in which there really weren't any winners. Both women in that situation want to be mothers, and only one of them can have custody of the child, and there's an enormous number of emotions going on. And so I wanted to explore that. So in Grace, you have Michelle, who's a young woman who is the mother of baby Grace, and Amelia, who's a somewhat older woman who's married to Piers, who has a very respectable job as a teacher at a private school in somewhere called Malvern in Worcestershire, which is where I grew up, a very beautiful part of the world. So I'm going to read you the prologue. It's not very long, I promise. Just breathe for me. Michelle tried to suck in air, but the deep searing pain that radiated out from her cervix seemed to be blocking the way. Instead, she exhaled, producing a guttural grunt. She closed her eyes to block out the scene in front of her. There were far too many people in the room witnessing her undoing, and focused on the living being inside her instead. She had named her when she'd felt her first kick. She'd sung to her at bedtime, had read to her in the early hours, and had whispered to her at dawn. They had grown to love each other, and now they were to be parted. Okay, good girl. Now pant, just pant. Michelle took a series of short breaths, keen to please the midwife, who'd been nothing but kind to her since she'd arrived at the hospital almost 10 hours ago. But in truth, part of her wanted to freeze time. If she could stop this, she would, and not just because of the pain. There's the head, you clever girl, and there's baby's shoulder. One more push and she'll be out. No, no, Michelle thought, I am not clever. Here she is. You have a beautiful baby girl. The atmosphere in the room changed. Michelle opened her eyes and saw the figures in the corner of the room were now staring between her spread-eagled legs at the wriggling, bloody infant who was just about to emit her first cry. The midwife rubbed her with a towel and then lifted her up, placing her on Michelle's naked chest. There you go, pet. Well done. You were a champ. Here's your reward. Michelle looked down at the face she'd been imagining for months, at her two warm, soft cheeks, her deep blue eyes and quizzical expression, her swollen pink lips. She was astounding. As she took her daughter in, an involuntary cry escaped her mouth before she could stop it. Then that woman arrived beside their bed. Okay, Michelle, we know this is going to be difficult, but you've got a day or two with her before the hearing. I know it's hard, but try to make the most of it. Michelle looked at her. She was a new one, quite young, fresh out of training probably, not someone she'd even got to know. And she knew nothing, not about life or this or her, nothing. Take her, said Michelle. But you can, I said, take her. Michelle couldn't bear the pain for 1 minute longer. She wanted it over with now. But Michelle, lovely, take her. I need a kip. Michelle watched as the social worker glanced anxiously at her more senior colleague, who was lurking in the shadows, and saw the nod of agreement that passed between them. The woman then leaned over her and wrapped her hands around the baby, lifting her up like a prize. She watched as the nurse took her from them and swaddled her before handing her back to them without a word. We'll put her in the nursery, the social worker said as they walked towards the door. She'll be there if you want to see her. Michelle didn't reply. But just before the door closed, she called out to them. Her name is Grace. You hear me? She shouted. Grace. So, as I say, that's the prologue of my next book, which comes out on the 7th of July. And sitting behind me is my first book, which, as Mark said, was a book, so that the Booksellers Association Book of the Month last August, which was pretty cool for a debut author. I was amazed because the person before me was, I think, one of the nominees for the Booker, and the person after me was Sarah Women's Still Life. So I felt quite blessed. Patience was inspired by my sister, Claire, who has a severe disability called Rett syndrome, and it features a really awesome woman who is funny and clever and quite cutting and a bit sweary, who is actually disabled and can't communicate at all. And so everyone thinks that she doesn't really understand, but she does. And so the book is partly narrated from her point of view, partly from her parents' point of view, both her mother and her father, and partly from her sister Eliza's point of view. And Eliza is also an adult, but has experienced growing up with a disabled sibling, as of course did I, and has been impacted by it. And the book's about what happens when Patience is given the opportunity to take part in a gene therapy trial. And they are real things that are ongoing right now, with the potential to reverse her disability. And it's what her family decide to do. And there are disagreements and there are secrets and all sorts of things kick off. So that's my first one, Patience, which actually comes out in paperback on the same day as Grace comes out in hardback. So I'm going to have a busy day on July the 7th. Any questions?
If anyone wants to throw any questions into the chat or ask them themselves, I'll just turn the permissions back on for you to do that. Then please speak at any point as we go forward. How did you find it being published for the first time, Victoria? We were hearing earlier on about Gabriella's route into publishing. What was your route in like?
So I joined hearing that your first book took 10 years, and so did mine, because I started it when I had a small baby, and he's now 12. And I sort of did it in the evenings, and I was probably completely exhausted, so it wasn't brilliant. But I started it thinking, maybe this could be something, and then I kind of put it down, got on with life, work and stuff. Had another baby, and 40 approached, and I felt like that was a watershed where I needed to do something and finally do it. And my husband said, why don't you do that creative writing course you mentioned? And I said, oh yeah, that's a good plan. So I got gifted some money from my parents and my aunt, and I did the Faber Academy 6-month writing a novel course online. And during that, I kind of got the bit between my teeth and I wrote the book. And I wrote the first draft, then I sort of thought it was ready and got very excited, but of course it wasn't. I think I had somebody give me an editorial report, which was really helpful. That was Louise Walters via Jericho Writers, and she gave me some basic stuff that I missed, but I mean, she said it had potential. So I worked on it some more and then started submitting to agents, and I got 2 offers from agents in the end, which was amazing. And I accepted my fabulous agent Hannah Wetherall from North Bank Talent, and she is brilliant and has great ideas and great contacts, and is just a great person to talk to me on the end of the phone when I'm having one of those days. So sorry, Hannah. So she took me on, and that was that. I mean, you know, and then from signing to publication of my first novel, it was a year and a half. It was ages, and I thought it would take forever. And then the pandemic happened. I signed in February of 2020, and then the month after we went into lockdown, and oh golly, we all know what that time has been like. So I was fortunate in many ways, because I didn't launch into a world of closed bookshops, which Louise did, and everyone else who launched in 2020.
I did.
Did you?
Twice.
Oh, I feel your pain.
Yeah, I had 2 books come out during the last 2 years of lockdowns, and it was an interesting experience in terms of marketing, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I watched from, you know, I joined the various groups that Louise was in, and I saw the difficulties people were going through. But the fact that, you know, do you remember those times when they actually sort of taped off the book areas of supermarkets because they were viewed as being, you know, luxuries and stuff? And you're thinking, oh my goodness, what has happened to us? What is going on? So by the time I launched last August, the bookshops were open, although sort of events and stuff were still quite difficult. But it was a slightly more normal launch than a lot of people got.
Tell us a little bit about your process for writing. There are 2 schools of thought on this normally, aren't there? There are people that plan and plot and are meticulous and have spider diagrams and skeleton plots and all sorts of things. And then there are those that go, I'm going to write a book about horses, and then they write a book about horses, and that's all the planning they do. Which camp do you fall into?
I kind of admire people who do the latter, but I'm not like them. I'm a planner. And I have a spreadsheet, actually not a spider diagram, but I do have a spreadsheet, and I turn each chapter has a line, and there's a brief summary about whose perspective it is, because I tend to write from several different perspectives in a book, and then a few headlines about things that are going to happen or that I think are going to happen. And then as I've written that chapter, it becomes green. So I've got a visual sort of nice sort of thing about my progress. And it's a definitely movable feast. You know, I will edit that spreadsheet a lot, and ideas will come to me, and I'll think, yeah, that's not right. And I'll go back and I'll make sure it's reflected in the spreadsheet so that I can keep up with what I'm doing. And I also have a very low-tech notebook which sits beside me, which I scribble ideas down in, and my phone as well. There's a note thing in my phone, and if I'm, you know, waiting outside swimming or ballet, which I seem to spend half my life doing because I've got 2 kids of that age, and I'll write something down like, no, this character does this, because I don't know about you, but I find that ideas pop into my head random times, like, you know, queuing for something or walking to school. So I find being able to keep the notes in my phone really, really helpful. And I use Google Docs to write so that I can actually access my document from anywhere, from my phone, from anyone's computer. So I have it on my laptop, my PC, and my phone. And so just carry it around with me, I guess, really. So I can just, because also that thing about having kids, my life is busy, punctuated by lots of driving around, driving to work. I lecture at university and stuff. So I sort of grab time from here and there and everywhere. Oh, I've got 20 minutes, sit down, log into Google Docs, keep going. So I don't have most of the time that luxury of big chunks of time. I have to write in smaller chunks, but actually I find that's probably better because I'm not good at being given a whole day and being told to segment it myself.
What about your research process? We were hearing earlier on this afternoon from Louise about her research process, historical fiction being somewhat different in terms of research, I guess, but how do you go about anything that you need to do for yours?
I'm a journalist, so it kind of comes, I live and breathe journalism. I still teach it at Kingston University, and so my instinct is to go primary research and go to, because I write contemporary fiction. So I interview people for Patience, my first book. I even interviewed my own mother because I wanted to talk to her about, because my sister and I are only 18 months apart, about the early years that I didn't remember, and look at it from a mother's point of view. So I interviewed her, but I also interviewed a very senior paediatrician and talked to her about gene therapy. I also spoke to a geneticist, so that I had a rounded view, and also so that I got the medical things as right as I possibly could. And I also had that very senior paediatrician read it after I'd written it to check that I hadn't made any big clangers, because although I feel like I know my sister's disability inside out, there are lots of things scientifically I don't get. So I do my research for Grace. I spoke to a wide range of people because I have not been in that experience myself, not that situation myself, and I wanted to make it as realistic as possible. I also got permission from, I spoke to a High Court judge, well, a family court judge, a very senior judge who didn't want to be named, but who had written some fictional scripts about family courts. So I was able to read them and sort of get a feel for what it's like in there, because as I say, you can't just walk into a family court, unlike normal courts. So I made those court scenes as accurate as I could, because again, that was important to me, because as a journalist, you know, I mean, fiction is making stuff up, of course it is, but equally I feel like it needs to be rooted in reality, and that adds to the power of the story as far as I'm concerned. So that's why I research so carefully.
I don't know whether Louise and Gabriella they are still here, I think. If they want to rejoin us at this point, I'd just be interested in comparing what Victoria's been saying with the experiences of either of you two as well, particularly in regards to planning, because this is a question I think that comes up all the time. Gabriella, you were writing non-fiction, so it's a slightly different exercise, but how do you go about planning for yours compared to what Victoria was just saying?
I think the non-fiction one was really quite different, although I started planning a different version of the book, and then I did plan the kind of psychoanalytic themes I wanted to cover. Later on, as I went, I planned around what were the key stories I'd knew from my work with clients that I wanted to tell. And then I started to think, what are the stories and what are the psychoanalytic themes? And that's how I planned. But I suppose I'm in between pantser and planner. So I also, you know, then would write some, and then, I mean, actually, when I was writing, after I got my deal with the publisher and I was writing, I suddenly thought of new chapters that weren't in the original submission to the publisher at all. And I suddenly thought, oh God, I've missed this and I've missed that. And
oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I obviously I have my spreadsheet, but it does change and chapters get added all the time. Yeah. And I put together a synopsis with a vague sort of feeling of the arcs and the main characters and things. But from the beginning of that, you know, conception of the idea to the execution, all sorts of things happen in the middle. And characters do things that you don't expect them to do, and they've developed. And I go with that quite often. In Grace, for example, there's a mother-in-law figure, and I started off with her being a really difficult, caustic kind of character. And then I found that actually she wasn't, and she was actually quite friendly and supportive. And I don't know, my brain, you know, quite clearly decided that day that this is what was going to happen. But, you know, and I'm quite nice sometimes to be guided by that. But I also am probably not confident enough to start a book and just go, oh, I'm going to write a book about X, without thinking what those peaks and troughs of the plot are going to be, because I feel like people have got to go on a journey with you, and they've got to want to keep reading. And so just writing a random stream of consciousness piece, I mean, that might work for some kinds of literary fiction maybe, but certainly not for something that you want to be a page turner that you want people to read. And I write the kind of books I want to read, you know, I want to read something with a really meaty plot.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your editing processes, Victoria. Do you use beta readers and then take their responses and edit, or agent edits, or how many kind of iterations do you go through from beginning to end?
Basically, I really trust my agent. There are lots of different, I mean, there are different kinds of agents, and I didn't know when I started that quite a lot of agents don't edit, but they do. And mine does, and so she sort of does the same kind of job as an editor, but she always makes sure that everything is as polished as it can be before it goes off to the publisher. And having her do that, so with Patience, we worked on it together for about 4 or 5 months. I probably did 2 or 3 different rounds of edits before it went out. I also do have a couple of trusted friends who, one of whom I went on my Faber course with, who I know will give me honest advice and feedback. If I show my manuscript to my husband, which I do, he will just say, this is great, and that, or lovely, I really enjoyed it, and that's all. And that's not, for me, enough, because I want them to say, yeah, but actually I didn't feel that character, or, you know, that scene didn't quite work. So I have a few friends who I do trust who will give me that feedback. And also, if I've interviewed someone, I often ask them to read through the manuscript to see if I've, again, made any mistakes, if something doesn't ring true. So I do. I mean, golly, by the time it's published, the book is probably quite unrecognizable from the first draft. I'm currently writing my 3rd, and it's quite weird because you sort of know you're writing something, most of which might not make it, but you're still doing it anyway, thinking, well, you know, I've got to have something down so I can edit it. And also the thing about being a journalist, to be honest, is that you're so used to people editing your work. It's not in any way an insult or a problem. It's just what happens. And so you kind of go, oh, yeah, you're right. Actually, that does make it better.
But you don't throw anything away, do you? Because if it doesn't work in a draft of a novel, then it may end up in a future novel, for example. Yeah,
I've got whole documents full of things that I've cut. And I don't know actually if I've ever looked at them again, but psychologically, rather than just throwing them away, I have them somewhere else. My pretties, you know, my love. And I just said, I feel bad about this chapter that I've just lost. But I do know people have had to cut whole characters. Louise has just said that she definitely throws away far more words than make it into the final novel. Yeah, I think you probably all do. And it is just one of those things that you accept. And I always think, you know, when I'm trying to write, if I don't, you know, I've just got to put something down. And even if I'm having one of those days where I'm not that engaged, I just try and do something so that I can come back it the following day and think, yeah, okay, so I need to rework that, but at least there is something on the page. Otherwise, it just becomes overwhelming.
You haven't been tempted to set a novel in the world of journalism yet, then?
No, I haven't. I had an idea a while back for a young adult book, sort of vaguely in the world of journalism, but I haven't explored that beyond the first couple of chapters. That was before I even wrote Patience. Like every novelist, I think I've got lots of ideas. I've got a list, and I've got a few things that I've been thinking of. But the journalism world, well, I have another idea which might become book 4, we'll see, which did involve a journalist, a TV newsreader actually. It's a world I know really well, so it would be quite easy to do without any research, I've got to say. But it's funny, the kind of stories that speak to you and you think, actually, I need to do that first. And the other world that I know really well, I know academia really well now, so that's something that I could explore. And my husband is an airline pilot, and it's one of those jobs which, it's a bit like being married to somebody in the forces. I think you are married to their job as well as them, and so that's another world that I know very well. In Patience, there's a couple of chapters set in Qatar. The father's working as an expat in Qatar, and I lived in Qatar for 6 years, following my husband's job. So I have bits of me, I mean, have definitely found their way into my books. It does help to have that personal experience, and for Patience, it being my first one, being able to write about something that it was essentially, you know, a lot of it was my own experience, particularly Eliza, Patience's sister. It has a lot of me in her, certainly her reactions and feelings. And that made things easier, because when you're first writing a novel and you're trying to create people from scratch, that's hard. Characterization and making somebody believable and likable and interesting is difficult. So you instinctively reach for things that you know, that seem familiar, so that you can make something ring true. And now I don't. I mean, Grace, there's no sign of me at all. And in my third book, also no sign of me. But it did start off that way because it felt the most natural way to do it.
But are the signs of other people that you know, though?
Yeah, well, I think that there's that weird thing about being a novelist as well, that actually everything it's got to be a composite of things that you've watched, seen, conversations you've had, everything that you've ever seen and every conversation you've had is somewhere in your brain. So when you're pulling out those characters, you are pulling out things that you've observed. And I'm not sure that any of my characters are a specific person, but they have bits of people, without a doubt. And I also do drop random names in of my friends, and now occasionally like colleagues of mine and students, just as minor characters, mainly to see, you know, if they've read it. Am I the nurse? Yes, you're the nurse, you know, or whatever it is. Mainly because thinking up names is hard, and it makes me laugh to be able to put people into random, completely, you know, they're nothing to do with that, they're nothing like that person in real life, but they're randomly, I don't know, the postman or something.
Oh yeah, but people love it, don't they? Because every crime writer will tell you that everybody wants to be killed in one of their novels.
Yes, exactly that. So I do that basically. So yeah, the nurses, the doctors, the random teachers, random characters are pretty much always my friends. Yeah. Why not?
Well, yeah, just work with what you know, don't you?
Yeah.
Can you tell us anything about what you're working on at the moment? I appreciate probably not much, but
yeah, it's another. Well, all of my books have strong, interesting female characters. I think that's the theme. Although one of the main narrators in Patience is a man, but I'm really interested in women of different ages and how they deal with challenges, and there are lots of them obviously in all of our lives. And so what I'm writing for book 3, and yes, details have not been announced, so I can't give you too much detail, but is two women at the core, one of whom is in her late 80s and one of whom is in her late 20s. More in common than they think. And I'm looking at community and about friendship and how nature and the countryside can be very healing. I grew up in rural Worcestershire, and as I said, Grace is set in Malvern, which is where I went to school. And the whole area it's rural, but it's the hills are stunning, and it's also where the Archers is apparently set. Borsetshire is actually Worcestershire, and so I kind of wanted to look at what rural life is like now, and it's not all brilliant, you know, Airbnbs at the weekend and chocolate box. There's a lot of rural poverty. There's a lot of people who can't find anywhere to live. There are, I mean, you know, things like fuel costs massively hit people who live in the countryside because they need their cars. There's no other way. It's no public transport anymore, all of that stuff. So I'm looking at that and and there's also a very friendly goat in that book. So yeah, I love the countryside. I have always loved it, and I've recently moved to although I still live quite near London, I actually live on an island now in the middle of the Thames, and I feel like I'm just kind of trying to head home, as close to home as I can, but here, in the fact that I'm surrounded by trees and green and ducks and no cars. And it just makes me feel better. And I think that's the same for a lot of people. And so that's kind of what I'm going for with book 3.
Excellent. We are, of course, in Devon, so we understand all about
Yeah,
rural life. And
so beautiful down there. Exactly that. Yeah, got the whole nightmare about the fact there's like no bus for a week. I mean, we famously used to have a bus that went past once, but you had to wait a week to come back in my local area. What was the point in running that service?
That's the shopping bus. That's
yeah,
what it is.
yeah. You got to camp by the bus stop for a week.
Yeah, that's how it works.
Yeah, and everyone is on, oil for heating, and it costs a blimmin' bomb. And you wake up and there's, I don't know, sheep in your garden. That happened to us lots of times. Rural life is it's not that amazing idyll that people see, or not always. And now I also wanted to look at the impact of second home owners, and I'm sure that's something that you feel strongly about in Devon, and what happens when places just get rented out and no one really lives there, or people just use it for the weekends and people can't afford to live locally. There's not enough social housing for people who are on lower incomes, and I want to sort of talk about that and see what I kind of wanted to explore that. I guess
they are certainly all important issues. Yeah,
the joy of it too, though, like there's nothing like a gorgeous day on the moors, is there? Or on top of a hill, just staring out at the horizon with the wind in your hair. And as you can see, I've got long crazy hair, so it looks quite crazy.
No, you're absolutely right, and this is why there are so many popular, for want of a better term, chick lit novels that are set in rural areas. They're all based in garden centres or coffee shops or bakeries.
But are they selling an unrealistic view of where you live?
No, that's absolutely what it's like here all the time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's nothing beats a coffee shop, does it really, with cake?
There are these great stereotypes, aren't there, as well? We smile about it all the time when we're shelving books back in the library, that there are stereotypes that you must follow. Every family saga must have a colour photo of a grubby child in front of a row of black and white houses. Every thriller must have the silhouette of a rough-looking man running away from something. These are the stereotypes, aren't they, of
That's the thing is, I mean, publishing's a weird industry in that way. Everyone has to fit in a category, and as you say, there is like a genre type for a cover. Those ones you're talking about, the Devon coffee shop books, are kind of pastel-y coloured, aren't they? Sort of cartoony.
Yes.
The thrillers, as you say, somebody running, lots of red, lots of white, lots of dark colours as well. I'm classified as book club fiction, kind of, which is a category that I think was fairly recently created for books that there aren't many other categories for. So I write kind of Jodi Picoult type issue-based books, which do have women in, not just women, that are also about relationships and but not necessarily romance, but definitely relationships, friendships, love in all its forms, and the kind of power of human love in all its forms, really something I'm quite passionate about.
Did you have input into your design work for yours?
Yeah, so when they were working on the ideas to patients, the editor briefed a few different kinds of designs, and we got a couple of different ones, and I'll just hold it up so everyone can see it. So I particularly love, there's a woman in a wheelchair on the cover. How many books do you know with women on the front, in a wheelchair on the front? And also that you can see my 4 main characters standing in isolation, which spoke to me because that's kind of how they are. They're all kind of dealing with their own individual pain without really communicating properly with each other. So I did get some input on that, and I loved it, actually, I have to say. The paperback of Patience is going to come out in bright yellow, but quite similar design. And Grace this is the proof, so this isn't exactly how it looks. As you can see, it's got kind of like the same kind of clouds, but different colours, with the baby in the middle. And I like this also because they're kind of looking wistfully at each other, and these two women who ostensibly are incredibly different are going through remarkably similar things. And with that book in particular, I wanted to make people realize that what you see is not necessarily what's there at all, and under the surface there's all sorts of stuff going on behind closed doors, and appearances can be deceptive. And just to make people think more, I mean, for example, there's a food bank in this book. There's a food bank in my church. I live near Weybridge in Surrey, one of the wealthiest places in the UK, and we have lots and lots of people coming to the food bank every week. And I wrote about this food bank because I want people to see that, you know, the people using it often are the people with jobs. They are trying to make ends meet. They are people that look just like everyone else, and they're only doing it because they need to. And it's something that we have to be more empathetic. We have to be able to see that people are in need around us every day, everywhere we are, and that they're just so important these days. I mean, it's sad they're so important, but they are. And so I wanted to write one in, and my character Michelle visits one, and it's quite moving and interesting what happens to her afterwards. So I don't want to ruin it, but no spoilers. but I felt, again, you know, I don't want to preach. I think preaching at people often they'll just switch off. So if they can just learn something from what I write, but also really enjoy what they've read, then that feels great. And with Patience, it was definitely about the experience of being a severely disabled person in society, when disabled people are often sidelined and ignored. That I felt I really wanted to get out there and to put people into that person's body, that person who can't itch or scratch, and who is just forced to put up with whatever the people around her want. And I just wanted to challenge people to imagine that. And if they do that and they read the book and they come out just thinking just a little bit more that person that went past them today in a wheelchair might have appreciated a hello or whatever it is, if that's how they feel, then I feel I've done something good. So I feel really chuffed that book's out there, because it was a labour for a long time. 10 years of labour for that book.
The old BBC remit, isn't it? Educate, inform and entertain.
Well, I did start off at the BBC, Mark.
Yeah, well, there you go. You've taken it away with you and applied it to your writing. Yeah,
that's what journalists are supposed to do also. You know, you want people to come along on the ride with you, but you also want to tell them important stuff. So that's kind of where I'm going.
Absolutely. Well, Victoria, thank you so much for taking the time to join us as well this afternoon. So July the 7th for the release of Grace, and the paperback release of Patience.
Exactly, same day.
You'll be on Twitter all day that day, if anyone needs you.
Yes, I can see that happening. And then on Friday, I'll be having a book launch at my local Waterstones and having some cake.
Excellent. And Waterstones is good for cake. So do seek out Victoria's books, and of course the books of all of the authors that have joined us this afternoon, Gabriella and Louise, who are both still around. But in the meantime, please, just before I stop recording, show your appreciation, everybody, to Victoria Scott for that presentation. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you.